Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Vatsky. I'm the Director of Multifamily Housing and Community Facilities, which the Washington State Housing Finance Commission. This meeting is a meeting specifically focused on acquisition rehab and the new policies for 2022 and 2023 that we're proposing, specifically related to acquisition and rehabilitation projects. So we've got a presentation that we'll walk through. Some of it is what we've walked through before, as some of the key criteria are for new construction as well as acquisition rehab, but we will try to specifically focus on the acquisition rehab in a bit more depth in this presentation. Lots of staff on the call today. So feel free to use the chat function, raise your hand. We'll certainly pause at different points to make sure folks are following and have a chance to ask questions, and we can have some discussion about what we're proposing. Appreciate you all being here. This is the third stakeholder meeting we've had in a series of the last few weeks, rolling out all of our new bond policies and the framework for bond cap allocation and 4% tax credits. So with that, yeah, let's go ahead and get going. So next slide. So we are talking about 2022 and beyond. We're at least kind of thinking that this would be a 2-year time frame that we're really focused on values and outcomes, the ones that we're proposing in this presentation. We may do some tweaks and changing of the dials within the categories, but for the most part, the values and outcomes that we're stating today is what we're proposing will be in place for the next 2 years. As I mentioned, we did a presentation May 26th that was really an overview of the values and an outcomes, so I'm not going to go into depth on those, but we do have all the presentations from the prior meetings and the recordings now up on our website. So the presentation slides as well as the recordings are available from the prior meetings. And then after this meeting, we'll get these posted, and then we'll quickly pivot to a comment period and a survey where folks can comment directly on all of these proposals. Today, we're going to run through the threshold criteria and the points and ranking, not only for kind of the for any application, but also for the AC rehab. Okay, next slide. So we've laid out 5 high-level values and outcomes that we're hoping to achieve. Acquisition rehab specifically is one of them. And the outcome we're really trying to achieve there is that low-income tenants remain in their housing and do not suffer displacement when the regulatory covenant expires, that their housing affordability is maintained and their units are improved, which improves the quality of their lives. And we realize that there could be trade-offs, certainly balancing the needs of the existing portfolio of affordable housing with new construction is a trade-off, but we want to make that call in terms of, although we want to prioritize the creation of new units, financing the acquisition and rehab of existing projects has also been a key purpose for the bond 4% tax credit program over the years. And we really want to maintain a predictable but limited amount of bond financing to ensure that there are resources available for rehabs that really prioritize and specifically address health and safety issues and energy efficiency of the current affordable housing portfolio. We also want to ensure that any equity being pulled out of projects as part of a refinancing is being reinvested into the housing to ensure long-term sustainability and livability of the units. So that's really the focus in terms of the changes in the acquisition rehab priorities and policies that we've put in place. We're also targeting and prioritizing projects financed with public funding, and then projects outside of King and Snohomish counties. And we still will use a ranking system that will prioritize by and for people of color, still look at greater cost efficiency, and in terms of acquisition rehabs is going to look at kind of major systems that are being rehabbed. But we'll go into some detail on that. Next slide. So for 2022, we're proposing just one round that would be in March. So that we can kind of get all the projects in at one time. We have some time to let folks adjust to the new criteria. We also may have time if there's adjustments made at the federal level by the end of the year to adjust to any of that. Projects that come in March would need to close by year end, but we would just have one round. We're going to be looking for intents to apply. We will have a form and a one-pager basically that just gives us a sense of the lay of the land, what types of projects are intending on applying, so that folks have a sense of that, not only us, but the developers. We're really looking to require more upfront, and we've moved many of the criteria or some of the criteria that we had before into threshold criteria. And we're streamlining what we're using to rank projects, but we're looking at really trying to compare like projects. And then we're looking in terms of the targets to meet certain floors and not exceed certain ceilings of spending in those targeted areas. Next slide. So this is basically the flow of how the process will work. Applicants will come in and be in one application pool. From there, you will be either split into new production or acquisition rehab. Again, we're going to focus most of our conversation today on the bucket of acquisition rehab. From there, you're either in a public leverage grouping or a non-public leverage grouping. And then from there, if you're public leverage, we're going to compare Seattle King County projects and then balance of state projects. For non-publicly leveraged deals, we'll be comparing King and Snohomish and then balance of state. And then developing lists. Those projects will all be listed in those different buckets and then ranked based on the scoring criteria. Next slide. And so the targets that we're really looking at is 15 to 25% acquisition rehab. And we're talking about the total amount of bond cap allocated in these different target areas or buckets. So 15 to 25% AC rehab. So we'll be targeting a minimum of 15%, but will not exceed 25%. Similar with public leverage, we're looking at trying to get at least 50% public leverage and no more than 60%, and then up to 40% a balance of state. And then basically what ends up being left is no public leverage King and Snohomish that's funded with the remaining projects. So I'll just pause there. I know many of you have seen this presentation or seen or participated in our other meetings, so have seen this, but for those of you who may be seeing this for the first time, I want to just pause and make sure folks are following so far. If there's any questions, if you want to raise your hand or put in chat that you want to ask a question, then we can. Okay. We can certainly get back to this if folks have questions as we go through the presentation. All righty, next slide. So now we're moving into the thresholds. Next slide. We're changing the definitions slightly. There's some slight nuances to the definitions now for acquisition rehab. Projects with income restrictions on them, such as re-syndications or with HAP contracts, RD projects, etc. So anything with an existing regulatory agreement. If you have an expiring use agreement, that still counts as a resyndication or as part of the definition of AC rehab. And bridge financing for projects at risk is okay. So if you purchase an at-risk property with bridge financing, we will still consider that eligible under the current definition for acquisition rehab. And projects that have rental subsidies, those projects must all have at least 50% AMI if you've got rental subsidies. And then anything that's an acquisition rehab of buildings outside of these government programs are new production. So if they don't currently have a regulatory agreement on them, then they would be considered new construction or new production and would compete in the new production pool and not be part of the acquisition rehab pool. So we're really looking at trying to focus on acquisition rehabs and HAP contracts or Section 8 type property preservation in the AC rehab pool. But syndication of our existing portfolio and ensuring the health, safety, and energy upgrades to our portfolio is pretty much our #1 priority. Okay, so with that, I think I'm going to turn this over. The next slide is Eli to talk about some of the thresholds around energy efficiency. Next slide. And Eli.
You did?
There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, I was getting some very odd pop-ups. Okay, so let me start over. My name is Eli Lieberman, and I'm the Senior Sustainable Energy Coordinator with the Commission. And I'm going to talk about this new threshold requirement we have around weatherization and ventilation for our rehabilitation projects. So as Lisa was saying, a priority for us going forward is ensuring the long-term sustainability and healthy living of tenants in projects within the portfolio. So we've been looking through some scope of works in the past, and we've identified that it's easy with the way the codes are written in Washington to sort of not have to bring up the standard of your rehabilitation to the new code if you're not sort of like rehabbing that part of the building. The sort of phrase that people throw around is, if you don't break it, you don't have to buy it. So we just want to ensure that there's a sort of threshold standard in this regard. So all projects, financed through the Commission need to comply with the Evergreen Sustainable Development Standard. Everyone will be very familiar with that. And under ESDS 4.0, there are 2 categories that are mandatory for rehabilitation projects. So a project can sort of meet ESDS standards by doing something called the deemed measured list, which is sort of a set of standards that the building needs to be brought up to. So an auditor will go into the building, they will look at components of the building that are on the deemed measure list. This is like wall insulation, floor insulation, ductwork insulation, windows, etc. And if the auditor finds the condition at X level, the deemed measure list says it needs to be brought up to Y level. So that's one way that acquisition rehab projects can comply with ESDS. The second way they can do it, this is an OR scenario, is through an ASHRAE level 2 and 3 audit. So projects can do either, but what the Commission is proposing here is that if you comply with the energy code under the residential provisions, then you'll need to do the deemed measure list. If you comply under the commercial provisions of the energy code, you can do either the deemed measure list or the ASHRAE option. So this is really buildings 3 stories or less will do the deemed measure list. So this is really going to ensure that the insulation, the heating systems are looked at, the ductwork isn't looked at, blower door tests are done. Oh, sure, absolutely, Robin. So that's going to be sort of the weatherization threshold. That really the crux is if you're permitting under the residential provisions, you'll need to do the deemed measure list. And you can view that right now, actually, by looking at ESDS 4.0 from the Department of Commerce's website, or feel free to email me and I'd be happy to email that to you. Another thing that we noticed in rehab projects was that a lot of them weren't updating the ventilation systems. And that's really goes against our new priority of healthy living for the tenants. So we want to make sure that the ventilation systems in all of our rehab projects are looked at. Um, when we sort of thought of like what was the standard we'd want to bring ventilation up to, we didn't want to make everyone bring it up to the new code, the 2018 code, because that requires balanced ventilation. And as some of you know, that can be a little bit tricky. All your new construction projects will have to have it, but right now it's a little bit soon to mandate that for rehab projects. So instead, what we're looking at is something called ASHRAE 62.2 2019, and that's the it's an American standard, but it's based off of an international standard. ASHRAE stands for the American Society of Heating, Refrigerant, and Air
Engine.
Conditioner Engineers. No one actually says what that is. They just call it ASHRAE. So this is something that's used all over the United States. It's used by the Department of Energy. It's considered sort of like the countrywide standard for ventilation and air quality. So that allows for exhaust only ventilation, which our newest version of the energy code in Washington doesn't. That requires balanced ventilation. So this is obviously easier to do, being able to do exhaust only ventilation. It'll set like the flow rate standard. So this is the amount of air that's going to need to move through the building based on the square footage and the number of sleeping units in the apartment. So we're looking at that, or we're looking at the 2015 Washington State Mechanical Code. So that's the code we just left, which also allows for exhaust only ventilation. So basically what this is going to do is between the deemed measure list, we're going to make sure that the buildings are sealed up and they're insulated well. And then through the ventilation standard, we're going to make sure they're ventilating well. So seal tight and ventilate right. That's what they say on the streets. So that's kind of what we're going to accomplish with these two goals. So really with the ventilation standard, it's going to require you to replace the bathroom fans. It's going to require you to place the kitchen exhaust fans with Energy Star, and it's going to set standards for the amount of air circulation that needs to move through the building. So that's where we're at for thresholds on rehabs. And if anyone has any questions, obviously feel free to reach out to me.
Great, I'll pause there. Folks want to ask any now or have any commentary on that? I know, again, we're looking at some big shifts in the AC rehab policy to really ensure that we're getting the level of rehab and energy efficiency in these buildings. If we're going to re-syndicate and put money into them, we want to make sure they're coming up to a certain standard. So I know this is a little different than what we've been doing in the past, but given how competitive things are, we want to be making sure we're prioritizing these things. Okay, with that, I guess we'll keep going. And Claire, I'll turn it over to you to walk through the additional program thresholds. Oh, now I see. Okay, Heather.
Oh, here we go, Heather. In a typical building from the 70s, 80s, what typical scopes to the envelope will occur to comply? Yeah, so Heather, I would take a look at that deemed measure list on its Appendix B of ESDS 4.0, and it's really going to be building to building, but likely it could be some insulation in the walls, like having to put in dense pack. It's going to require you to probably do a blower door test. It's going to require you to look at the windows, if they're like single pane or inefficient double pane, those sort of things. But it'll really be building specific, and you'll have to look at the deemed measure list. And that's sort of the good thing about it, is that every single building you can look at it, and you'll look at these core components, and you only need to bring them only the components that are below the standard that ESDS has established will need to be brought up. So yeah, check out Appendix B of ESDS 4.0.
Okay, if we could move to the next slide and then Claire, take it from there.
Sure. So these are the some of the new thresholds, and this is throughout the program. So if you have been to previous stakeholder meetings, you know about these. We have one of the new thresholds will be is under community revitalization plan. And this is much looser than the definition we had previously for points. It just must be in a federal, state, regional, or local community revitalization plan area. And we'll ask you to submit a copy of the plan and show the project location and boundaries. Unlike the previous one for points where you had to demonstrate that money had been spent and there was a variety of other criteria for that, then I know that was difficult for some folks. That's why we've loosened it and then just have it as a threshold. And then the other way you could potentially qualify is if you're in a QCT or DDA and in a very high or high opportunity area as defined by the Puget Sound Regional Council of Governments, or in an area of low environmental health disparity as defined by the University of Washington. And I've got, we can provide you a link to the map that shows, and I think it's down as fine as census tract throughout the state. What qualifies as low? I appreciate that this is a score to 1 to 10. I don't know if we've picked a number yet. So if you have an idea about this, what qualifies as low, I would be interested in your input because I've looked at this map as well. And
Yeah.
you know, as I remember, it's a colored map, and I believe that like blue is low impact and reddish orange is high. So it might be anything that's in the blue tones all the way across, but we'll see how, again, the idea is not to make this hard. The idea is to make this work. So,
And then,
go ahead, Lisa.
no, were you done? I didn't want to interrupt you.
That's fine.
Okay. So Robin had a question about housing authorities, and yeah, housing authorities are get their own allocation, and so we'll be under separate criteria. We'll work with the housing authorities around that, but yeah, for the most part, they'll probably just need to meet the basic threshold criteria and not a certain point system. Right now, they just need to meet a minimum point. So yeah, they've always been treated differently as it relates to some of these policies and points, and we would continue to keep that as a separate allocation process from ours.
And as to David Roberts' question, I'm hoping that every single site that you pick is going to be able to, we're going to be able to shoehorn it into this definition. If you have a specific site that you're concerned won't meet this definition, I would very much appreciate if you sent me the address so I can kind of do some investigation around it. I've done a fair bit of looking at projects we have financed to date, and they do seem to qualify, but if you've got one that doesn't, or you think it might not, let's kind of think about ways that we can get it qualified, or if it's really a problem, then I need to also know that because we might need to add some additional criteria to make it easier. And it is not the requirement for high or very high opportunity area. It's an option. Either you do one or you do two. So I'm thinking most people are going to be able to do one. It's going to be a very rare. Bitter Lake is going to be in a federal, state, regional, or local community revitalization plan. So it's not an issue. Don't worry about two. You've got it, Heather. That's my answer to that one. Our goal is to be as inclusive as possible with this, not exclusive. Next slide. A nonprofit sponsor. Everybody has been taking these points. Either they are a nonprofit or they've managed to find a nonprofit to partner with. So that will just continue as was in the past. And next slide. We will have a letter of intent. This will be simply a fairly simple form, as Lisa mentioned, a one-pager that just tells us what you have to have in mind 60 days in advance. Go ahead and hit the next slide. And then these are the requirements for this bucket of acquisition rehab only. So let's go to those next. And just as a reminder, this will be the process that we will apply the targets and we will be adjusting the list. So if you remember how Lisa went through how we're going to be doing this process, you can look at this set of, you can kind of get an idea of what bucket you would be falling into, which would be the acquisition rehab bucket. And let's go down to the next slide. And then within that bucket, you're going to be in a, the project will be publicly leveraged or will not be publicly leveraged. So that could be in the city of Seattle, it would be 10% of the project has received public leverage, and it'll fit under that. King and outside of Seattle and balance of state will be 5% of the project. And this is a figure that we've come up in cooperation with our partners that are providing public leverage to these kinds of projects. Go ahead and give us the next one. And we'll go now into project ranking. Now that you've been put into your bucket, how are you going to be ranked? We will have some pipeline transition points so that if your project was submitted in January 2021, was evaluated to be ready and received at least 70 points. And if it meets all the 2020 policy and application requirements, then you will qualify for 5 points as a transition project. This is to help folks that have already invested into projects, had them ready to go, and help them just get a little leg up because they already have quite a bit already into a project. It may be difficult for them to pivot to this new policy.
And then I'll just add that for folks that have been following along with us in our previous stakeholder presentations, this is a new ad. And this goes for both new construction and acquisition rehabs. And for the new construction, it'll be folks that came in 2021, in the 2021 allocation round. But we added this based on some feedback that we got from folks that are in the existing pipeline, haven't been competitive so far this year, and recognizing that we're really transitioning and shifting the focus of our policies, want to make sure that some of those projects can still compete.
Yeah, I think we can do the next slide then. If you have a historic property, you'll get a point under this new system. Brownfields, gray fields, adaptive reuse, these generally don't apply to acquisition rehab projects, so we have eliminated that as a potential point category. Go ahead. Hit the next one.
And then Robin has a comment
does she have a question here about community revival?
Yeah, and so no, that is not now. That is the main.
None of these more restrictive definitions down.
Right.
Because it's not for points, it's just for threshold. Okay, going back to ranking. This is new for acquisition rehab. You will get 10 points for each major system up to 3 systems. So this could be for up to 30 points. And those systems, as HUD has them, is roofing, cladding and weatherproofing. So that includes windows, doors, siding, and gutters. That's an inclusive list there. Plumbing, electrical, and then heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. HVAC is a single major system. And then if you're going to put in broadband, that's another point. And we will be asking folks to submit a third-party capital needs assessment to verify the needs. So you just don't slap a new roof on there because you want 10 points.
And I do want to acknowledge that in this list, there are some things that are required as part of the deemed measures list, like windows. And then we talked about the ventilation piece. So some of our threshold requirements will require pieces of this, but we're defining the major systems as all of those things, not just that one piece. So, but you will get one of the pieces of this as part of doing the threshold requirements. So we realize there's a little bit of redundancy there, but we're trying to kind of hit this minimum threshold and then really go beyond that. And so Heather just put in a comment about if the roofing
Roofing being the
system,
cheapest. Yeah, we know this.
maybe it should be ranked less.
Interesting point. And to answer the question about the broadband, the building just needs to be wired up for broadband. You don't have to provide it free for residents. There may be some issues about it being a basis or not. So. And as for plumbing and electrical, I would have to go back to see how the HUD, how HUD defines these. We're hoping not to have to define them themselves if we can use somebody else's definition. And I honestly don't know, Emily, off the top of my head. I'd have to rummage in the HUD documents. Yes, we will do that. And then there's a question before that, which is, if we have to do a major system replacement prior to getting an award, because we did.
Get an award, but the work is within the 24. Will this count for points?
In other words, you did the work previously.
That's
so like question. You acquired the project and you knew that you had needed to do this work, so you did it, but you didn't get the allocation. Interesting.
Yeah, let us think about that, Adam. That's a good question. And I don't know if the transition points help or not. Yeah, how that factors in, I guess.
I think that a simple LED lighting conversion for the entire building doesn't count as electrical.
I don't know, Cindy, you said, yes, you can. What did you, yes, you can. What are you responding to, Cindy? Can we unmute Cindy if she isn't already?
I was just going to say, we've done 2 major rehab projects where like the elevator couldn't wait. And one was a seismic, there was a earthquake and there was balcony issues, so seismic issues. And the CPAs and the tax investors have allowed us, as long as the purchase price reflects that improvement, you can carry it over in basis. So we've done it a couple of times. If that's the question about if you had a major system change within recently, you would just need to put it into the purchase price.
Yeah, I think one issue is basis. Another issue is, are you getting points in our system of ranking?
Yeah,
I think the question was about points, but thank you for clarifying that. Yes, it would include, you could count it as basis. That's good. That's great.
Okay.
And so then there's a couple of others, questions about elevator being included. And we had actually talked about elevator internally. And then, yeah, we still need to get clarification then on the kind of plumbing and electrical, what that all means, it looks like, but. Right, Adam's clarifying it was more on the points. Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. Great.
Should we go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think so. I think we've responded.
Oh, I'm gonna hand this off to Eli.
Great,
Eli,
thanks,
back up.
thanks, Claire. I'm back. So from the last slide, Claire showed that there were these major ventilation or major systems pieces, including HVAC. And while you can get the 10 points for those, it's sort of your choice, right, on how what you want to replace the HVAC system with. So here we're going to add on extra points if you go towards a sort of higher standard, and also gives you the flexibility. If say heat pumps just don't work for your building, then we're not requiring you to do heat pumps. But if they do work for your building and you want to do heat pumps, then you can get 10 points plus 5 for 15 points. 10 points for the major system, 5 more because you did it with heat pumps. So in that category, we have balanced ventilation with heat recovery or energy recovery and wildfire smoke filters. So this is obviously, I'm sure you are all aware, wildfire smoke has become a huge problem in Washington. It's probably only going to get worse. It's a huge health inequity issue. So we really wanted to address this. And luckily ESDS has a section that specifically addresses this. So if you, are going to upgrade, you'll have to do a little bit of the ventilation piece for the threshold, but you can take it up a lot if you want to provide balanced ventilation with heat recovery or energy recovery and filters for wildfire smoke. So that'll be worth extra points on top of the other points you would be getting. I already mentioned heat pumps. And then I guess this is separate, it's not additive, but solar we're including for 3 points. And EV charging stations we're including for 2 points. Ginger says, can the EV points for a charging station at the parking space on the street adjacent to the project? So this is like a city-owned charging station, Ginger?
Or you'd be putting it in.
Or you'd be putting it in the street.
Ginger, could you give us a little more on the, if it's part of the development, if the project pays for it, but on the street, if it's part of the development.
Yeah, I guess it would still have to meet the same amount of chargers though, which I think we would calculate off the number of parking spaces still, as opposed to like street parking spaces. So you'd probably have to work that one through with us, Ginger, but that could probably work.
Okay.
Next one. Cost efficiency is also a major way that we'll be distributing and ranking, distributing bond cap and ranking projects. It will maintain the current point structure. Well, we will review the TDC limits, and also we plan to adjust for the higher costs, specifically in the city of Seattle.
And we will have a separate new limits for acquisition rehab. Before, everybody was under the same limits, and clearly there's apples and oranges here. So we're going to do some work on creating TDC limits for acquisition rehab specifically.
Okay, moving on to the next slide. The nonprofit donation, donation of 10 basis points is worth 2 points. We originally had it as 1 point, and there was hue and cry at the last stakeholders meeting, so we doubled it to 2.
And then Robin has a question about mid-rise 4 to 8 stories or taller buildings retrofitted to include heat pumps, hugely difficult. If points dictate the victors, this will favor low-rise lead stunts AC rehabs. Again, you will be ranked in your pools buckets. So the Seattle, King County, potentially taller urban buildings will be ranked against taller urban buildings, and Balance Estate will be ranked against Balance Estate. So we're hoping that kind of levels the playing field on that one.
Next one. Oh, now we're on to buy in 4, and this goes over now to Carrie. Carrie, take
Hi,
it away.
can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm Carrie Williams. If you haven't encountered me before, I'm kind of leading the community outreach efforts in our division. And I'm going to go through the buy-in 4 points. As you can see, they're the same. If you've been to any of our stakeholder meetings, they're the same 26 points that we've introduced at other meetings. We are still, I will preface this by saying we are still sorting out language that will be much more specific in terms of the continuums. We are talking to a lot of people about partnership agreements and how we can best get to our goals while recognizing that we're in a reality that might not accommodate exactly what we want to do yet. So we can go through these. As you can see, they've been broken out into 4 sections. Ownership is the larger incentivization here, and that's a direct result from community feedback. What we've heard is that ownership is the very most important thing to them. And this entire points category has sort of twofold goals. One is to build wealth and assets in the BIPOC community and for BIPOC people. And the other is to allow communities or enable communities to have a bigger voice in the development process and design process. So that's how they've been kind of split up here. So we'll start with number 1, next slide. This is the ownership entity. And just to clarify what this means, the top table you'll see is for sole entity. This is when you're not in any kind of partnership, you're coming in by yourself. If you are a for-profit entity, it's a simple ownership, more than 50% BIPOC owned. If you are a nonprofit entity, you can get up to 8 points, but we've broken it down into smaller categories. If more than 50% of your staff is BIPOC, you get 5. If you have a BIPOC executive director, you get 2. And if you have more than 50% of your board as BIPOC, then you get 1. If you are coming in as a partnership, in other words, you're partnering with another organization and together you're forming the sponsor. If you can manage to create a situation where more than 50% of the ownership goes to a BIPOC organization who is your partner, then that's going to get you the full 8 points. We realize that that is a really high bar. So we're encouraging everyone to try to reach it, but we understand that the investor community is a big part of this, and that may not be possible. Therefore, we're offering incentives of 3 points if you can get to less than the 50% ownership, maybe that 51-49 where you're the 51 because you're taking the financial risk, but making financial reward possible for the BIPOC organization that you are partnering with, as well as significant development decision-making power. And this may be, the language around this may be sort of the process of decision-making being spelled out and delineated, realizing that final decision-making is often dictated by the investor to be only the 51% party. Okay, I'll pause there for just a second. Robin.
Okay, so yeah, there's a couple of questions, right? So right, it's not a sliding scale in this, it's a range.
It's an additive, yeah.
Right, and so in this particular category, it may be a little different in each of the categories, but in this one, yeah, you've got it. It's either 8 or 3, basically. Or yeah, you can earn up to 8 if you're the nonprofit by having all of those pieces if you're a nonprofit. Or in terms of the partnership, yeah, it's different. So, and then why does 40% of developer fee apply to when the BIPOC org is more than 50% owner? So the developer fee is in a separate category. We'll get to that, Ginger. And then it looked like Cindy had her hand up. Is that? Cindy, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I had a question. Obviously, the 51-49% for the ownership structure and who's taking on the guarantees is already, everybody's aware of that. Is there a way, if you have the land is the land is owned by the BIPOC organization and leased back to the partnership. And then they have right of first refusal. How does that work within the sliding scale? Is it all or nothing? They're either 51 and control it or they're not, or is there?
Yeah,
other-
that's a great question. And so this is just one of 4 categories. So maybe it's best if we keep going because
Yeah, that's going to come on the next slide.
yeah, that's a great one for long-term ownership. And yeah, so that's so this
So
one
let's
is
move on, and
this one is really just about that entity
as it exists now. Yeah.
and the ownership piece of that, general partner piece. So
Yeah, go
and
ahead
then-
and advance to the next slide and we'll talk about long-term ownership.
although Philippa's adding something here, shouldn't there be points for BIPOC senior staff versus having, for example, lots of BIPOC property managers and no executive leadership?
That's not the feedback that we've gotten from community. The priorities that they gave us is that if your organization has a majority of its staff as BIPOC, then that is a good indicator of the level of equity and inclusion your organization has achieved, and the direction that they have gone in. We did put this out to say, would senior development staff, would executive leadership, aside from the executive director, matter? And they were ranked in order, and more than 50% BIPOC staff came out on top by far. Okay, let's move on, and then I can answer all more questions at the end too. So this is the second piece of ownership, and this is the long-term ownership by community-based organization. So this is what we have now is a 0 to 8 point category. We are going to break this down into some specifics for you as soon as we can get some good language around that. We're kind of thinking right now that there are 3 elements to this. One is the option to purchase at year 15. One is the developer fee, including terms for the deferred development fee. And the third is operating agreements in terms of cash flow and decision-making. And basically, we're going to stack this category such that how the most favorable terms to the back or to the CBO at the back end are going to be the highest achieving developments.
But
Okay.
adding land and lease stuff, that could be another one.
At least that could be an option. Yeah, we did hear that near the very beginning. Someone floated that idea in terms of, if it's a very long-term lease, like a 99-year lease back to the community organization, that would probably count as long-term ownership. So yeah, we would like to explore that. I think that's a really good point. I can't remember who brought that up, but thank you, Cindy.
Yeah.
Okay. Now that we've reached the end of the ownership conversation, are there any questions about ownership? Understanding that hopefully that we're going to get more specific language to you as soon as possible. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. This is a slide. This is a category that is meant for quote partnerships. They are some kind of partnership. They're not the general partnership. There's no ownership requirement here. This is when you are partnering with a community-based organization that is, for instance, going to have their offices on your first floor, or they're going to do the community engagement piece for you, or in some other way, they're going to bring value and more community voice and more community presence to your project. And the points here are going to depend on how satisfied the community-based organization that you're partnering with is with the arrangement that you've come to. So this is meant for a couple of things. One is to encourage you to go ahead and try to partner with those organizations that don't have the financial resources or wherewithal or capacity to actually have an ownership stake, or aren't interested in that, don't want to be housing organizations, but do want to have some kind of presence. And the other is to empower those organizations to have something that they're bringing to the table in negotiations with you, because they can offer you the chance to get these points in exchange for, a favorable lease term, for example, or other things that might be important to them.
And Robin's asking about what if the developer itself is a CBO, then yeah, you can get those points. So no, you
Yeah.
don't have to partner, but if you are not a community-based organization in that specific community, and again, this is going to be reflective of the community that you're developing in, and just having done a development in that community does not meet that criteria. But yes, it could be that you are all of the above. So you could be a community-based organization who is developing, who then is going to be able to get these points. So
Right.
it really just depends on who we are talking about as the main sponsoring entity. And then, but yes, this was an opportunity to bring in other community-based organizations, especially if you were a developer who develops in more than one community, then you might partner specifically with an entity that's in the community you're developing for. And you may have be a developer that's a much more general in terms of where you're developing. So, or you could be in that community itself. So yeah, you don't have to be a CBO without resources. That is not the measure, but that was just one example.
No, there will not be a license requirement. You're referring, I think, to the old facilities,
Existing.
existing facilities. Yeah. That will not be a requirement anymore. Oh,
wait, we're not done yet.
all the slides just disappeared.
Right.
Okay, go forward a little bit to the community engagement slide, please.
Sorry, that was my puppy put paws right on the computer.
We allow for puppy mistakes around here. Okay, yeah, here's the last category, which is the community participation and decision input process. We could also sort of call this collaborative design. We are wanting to incentivize you to do a fairly meaningful, robust, deep, early community participation process. To make it a little easier on you, we are going to offer several pre-approved kind of toolkits that you can use. And we are going to ensure that you don't have to do any redundant work. The ESDS requirements that you already have to meet will be augmented by this work, not replaced. And this will also include any community engagement you're already required to do as part of design review or other municipal permitting requirements. So we'll make sure that you're not having to double up there. And then we also would like to incentivize making decisions and development decisions that are a result of the community input. There's still some details to be worked out about this, including, some development decisions are significantly more expensive than other development decisions. So there may be kind of a weighted consideration of what you're putting into your properties that the community say they want. Heather, that's a great question. How the community engagement works with an AC rehab. I think you're probably going to want to work with the existing tenants.
Yeah, what we talked about was that your community is the existing tenants at this point, right? I mean, so how we would define community for an AC rehab is the existing tenants. Exactly, right. Thank you, Robin. Yep. And then there was another comment about
Yes,
the
NIMBY.
Yeah, and again, this is AC rehab, but I can appreciate that there might be the broader implication.
No, you don't have to not pursue them. My guess is that the community is defined by who you're developing for. So it doesn't have to be the residents around your development. It might be, in the case where you're developing for a community that is existing and very strong, and they are the people who are going to move right into your development. But it may be the case where you're putting affordable housing into an area that does have some NIMBY issues, that doesn't have a great representation of the kind of tenants that you're going to be marketing to or that you're going to be targeting. In that case, what you're going to want to do is engage with that community. You're going to want to identify through demographics, through your market study, through any means that you can, who are the people who are going to be tenants in your projects, and find a way to reach them. That's the community that we're talking about.
Right. Targeted to the residents is really the point here. And then Philippa is suggesting that this category just seems very easy to manipulate and hard to assess. How do you know what the sponsor did as a result of the community input and what they would have done anyway? And how do you know what community input they ignored?
Part of the toolkits that we're going to offer are going to be some documentation by entities other than yourselves. So they're either going to be community leaders, or they're going to be requirements for video representations of your meetings, or other sort of records and evidence of the process itself. We're all kind of feeling this out for the first time. So we're going with what we think will work, and we're going to identify holes along the way, I'm sure. So yeah, an appeal period, given some of the subjective analyses. Yeah, we will consider all kinds of things. We're considering also, for the subjective analyses, going to a third party rather than having the commission do that work in-house. We are considering having a contractor do all of that evaluation, so that it's even more sort of trying to get that more objective.
But it will come down to the commission's discretion. So I mean, we're going to have language that allows us to have some discretion based on the goals and the outcomes we're trying to accomplish. And, you know, I know this is difficult because everyone wants to know what their points are going to be, but, you know, yeah, we're going to try to do the best to, and I hope everybody also does their best in a good faith effort,
Right.
in trying to really be more inclusive. Like, you know, I appreciate that folks are constantly trying to figure out how to be more competitive. And what we're asking for is for some more inclusivity and community engagement. And so yeah, it's not going to be a perfect science. This is why it's only 5 points in this category, and we'll have it broken down. And we hope people will act in good faith.
Don't walk too far down that road, Robin. We haven't made any decisions about that yet, in terms of who that third party might be. It's just something that we're talking about. We're going to try to I hope I didn't say calm down. I never want to say that, especially to a woman.
Yeah, and it may be that we just ask for some people, some outside folks to take a look at it, because we know we're not experts in this, right? I mean, so we may seek assistance, you know, to kind of truth test, you know, does this seem reasonable or not, right? I mean, I think, yeah.
We would also strongly encourage you, if you are partnering with one of those community-based organizations that we've been discussing in previous slides, that the budget for community engagement be allocated to that organization, and they lead your community engagement efforts, because they are more experienced in doing this. They know how to reach people, they know what questions to ask, and they know the sort of means and methods that will work the best. The community engagement toolkits that we'll provide for you will have sort of a section that says, these are the things that you're going to need to budget for. So you'll have an idea of the kind of money that you're going to need to spend on this process, because it's probably more than you're spending now, and we understand that. I guess what Lisa said is true. At the end of the day, we're hoping that you all understand the spirit of this intention, and that you try to do it as best you can. We also will encourage you all along the way to please reach out to us and talk with us about what you're considering, talk with us about the partnerships you're considering, talk with us about the community-based organizations and the community and how you're identifying them. We are going to be here for support and help.
And then there was a comment from Roberta about she hopes the commission approved toolkits still allow for local creativity. What works in one place may not be appropriate in another. And
Absolutely.
yeah, I think
That's why we're going to do several toolkits.
And, you know, if you have a specific local process or you know, a toolkit or yeah, if, you know, especially Roberta, if you're representing the Tacoma Housing Authority, if you already have a process in place, yeah, we'd love to hear about it. And if it, again, meets the essence and the, yeah, the key criteria of these toolkits, then absolutely we would want you to be sensitive to your local community. That's kind of the whole point. So
yeah, it will be definitely tailored. I have some expertise in community engagement as a concept and practice, but I don't have the expertise in your communities. So I'm going to do my best to kind of set the bar for what kind of depth we are looking for. And we're going to be listening to you in terms of how you want to meet that bar.
and so, yes, Robin, I don't know how much time it'll take us, but we, you know, we need more time. I mean, you know, and on, so I feel like on one side of the scales, we've streamlined and we've got the buckets and we're going to be comparing like projects. A lot will depend on how many projects are in each of those buckets and where we're having to draw the line or, you know, if we get additional resources at the federal level, I still want to keep that in everybody's mind about the backdrop that we're still working within. I also want to remind folks that rents are decreasing in certain areas, and some of these projects are not nearly as feasible, especially with the cost increases we're seeing. So, you know, a lot will depend on the round and the applications that we get. But yes, we're going to take some time to, you know, read through and process these points. The other ones we've kind of streamlined. So, you know, hopefully, on one hand, it's a little more straightforward to get through our process. I mean, you wouldn't believe the time we've spent on either CRP or location efficiency or, yeah, I mean, we've spent hours debating some of these points in our previous rounds. And I suspect we will continue to spend hours, you know, reviewing all this stuff, and we'll do the best we can to be as timely as possible. And it may take some time. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would invite anyone who has further questions on any of these by and for points to reach out to me. I'm going to put my email address in the chat, and anytime I'm happy to meet with you separately.
Yeah, we're still, I'll put this out to everyone. We've been doing one-on-ones or smaller group discussions because I know this is a lot for everyone to absorb in any one big setting. And so I know I'm glad we've kind of rolled it out in several steps, because I think that's been helpful, because I think each time folks hear it, people are getting different pieces of it. But we're happy to set up one-on-ones or small group discussions for anyone who has questions or comments. And yeah, we'll have a written comment period starting next week. But yeah, if folks really want to have more of a dialogue, we are happy to set up meetings. Or you can reach out to any one of the staff individually with specific questions as well.
Okay, I'm going to wrap up my portion and go to the next slide and turn it over to
Whoever's next. It might be
whoever's
me.
next.
I think we're more or less done, if I'm not
Yeah, I think we
mistaken.
are nearly done. So it might be back to Lisa just to tell what the next steps are. Once we see
Thanks,
the next
everybody.
slide, we'll know.
Thanks, Carrie. Yeah, can we get the next slide? I think it was just next steps. So we've done, this is now our third meeting. Like I said, we've posted the presentations from the May 26th and the June 3rd. We'll try to get this up now that we've got the whole page set up. It took us a week to get the page set up, but we got it all set up. It should be live today for the prior presentations and the recordings. to Philippa's questions, no, there's not going to be TOD points for acquisition rehab. Acquisition rehabs are already there. And we've moved TOD to basically threshold within ESDS at this point for kind of the program. So if you're meeting ESDS, then you're more or less meeting the TOD threshold for us. So as I mentioned, we'll do a public comment coming out of here with a survey, and then we seem to be on track more or less to get to the July commission meeting to present all of this. We've done a first presentation on the values outcomes to the board, but then we'll circle back for full approval on the threshold points and the whole framework at the July meeting. We will have a point summary list out as well on our website, and we'll have a slightly separate one. We'll have a new construction and an AC rehab with all the points listed, because again, I know it's a lot for everyone to absorb. Let's see. So Emily's asking, how would an AC rehab deal that proposes adding new units as part of its resyndication? Some existing properties have extra land for infill building in high land cost areas. I think right now our current definition has a certain percentage. So it's based on percentage. So I don't know, Jason, if you could look that up or chime in if you know it off the top of your head. And yeah, Jason's checking, so he'll be right back with that. And then Russell's asking, what will be the allocation split between the AC rehab round and the new construction round? So it's all one round. Let's be really clear. And actually, maybe Sojourn, can we go back up to one of the bucket slides? So basically 15 to 25% is what we're looking for AC rehab. So we're going to shoot for a minimum of 15%, and we will not go beyond 25%. So it really just depends. We will not go deeper into the AC rehab to get to balance estate. We want to make sure that we're not cutting into the new construction, but we want to make sure that there's at least a pathway for at least 15% of the amount of bond cap allocation going to AC rehabs, but no more than 25%. As far as TDC limits, yeah, hopefully by July. So yeah, in the next few weeks, we're working on the TDC limits as we speak. And so yeah, we should have something in the next couple of weeks on the TDC limits. And then I don't know, Jason, were you able to? In the current policies, a project could receive rehab points if 80% or more of the housing units exist at the time of application are to be renovated. So that's something for us to consider, but yeah, so I guess we will have some kind of breakout percentage of what's existing versus new so that it's clear where you belong. In a mixed deal, it's more than 50% being rehabbed. Yeah, so we'll have to think about how that lines up with our new requirements, but yes, we'll have a definition there. But we'll need to talk a little bit more amongst ourselves. If you have any thoughts about what makes sense, that would be helpful. But I would think, yeah, at a certain point, if it's really, it would need to be mostly the resyndication, right? And if you're adding some units, that's great. But then, yeah, so I think if it's really like 50-50, yeah, we'll just need to talk amongst ourselves. How does the new bond scoring relate to the drop-down menu online application? Still a goal, but with lots more attachments? Yes, that's probably correct. We're definitely, since we're pivoting and not doing the online application for July, that does give us a little bit more time and space to craft what the online application looks like in this new framework. So yes, we'll know more shortly. We're still working on all that, but yes, one of the main, we're still thinking it's a combination of just uploading documents and entering information directly. And most of the math and, sources and uses, a lot of the Excel spreadsheets will just have you upload and not try to enter all that information. So, so will the points competition occur within the overall set aside or within each list, within each of the 4 buckets under the, so each list, yes. So for the AC rehab, maybe go up one more slide, or show the first 5 steps. Might be a little easier on that. Yeah, so that, right, that top, the next one, I think is, yeah, so right, so if you're a public leverage deal, then you'll be broken out to Seattle King and Balance Estate and then ranked. And then if you're a non-publicly leveraged deal, you'll be broken King, Snohomish, and then Balance Estate and then ranked. So the point competition is, again, trying to compare like projects as best as possible. So you come in as an AC rehab, you either have public leverage dollars or you don't. And again, those thresholds are stated as 5% balance estate. So if you have trust fund dollars or local city of Seattle dollars or King County, there's a specific amount of dollars to get into one of those buckets. So if you are in the public leverage bucket, then you'd be separated by geographic distribution, same thing with the non-public leverage, and then each of those lists are ranked. It's certainly quite possible, and this is what we've tried to depict in this flow chart, that there's only a couple of projects or one project in that list. And as long as you've met the thresholds, and we probably will create a minimum point score, then you're in, if you meet that criteria and the minimum points. And so only in Seattle King will there be a mix of AMI set-asides. Balance of state, you just have to have at least 20% at 50%. Although, again, for the AC rehab, if you've got rental subsidies, you have to have at least 50% at 50%. So I think that answers your question, Russell. Or should I ask, did that answer your question? Okay, great questions, really helpful feedback. Again, we'll post this. We'll be asking for written comments. We're open and available to talk more and walk through any of this, especially if you have specific scenarios you're trying to figure out. And yeah, if there's no other comments or any other questions. And how are folks feeling about this? Is it reasonable? Is it doable, especially on the rehab threshold criteria? And yes, the mix has to do with meeting the existing tenant set-asides currently in existence to meeting underwriter criteria. Yes. And so we'll still have the same policy. If you need to change the underlying set-asides that currently exist, you need to come in beforehand and get approval from compliance. So that's a whole process that will remain the same as we've had if you're going to change the AMI set-asides. But yeah, there's no points for AMI set-asides. So that's part of it, is trying to be a little bit more flexible on that to meet the needs of the existing projects. And yeah, folks are welcome. Thank you all for participating. Really appreciate everyone's time and input. And so, yeah, thanks, Philippa. Yes, on an historic rehab, it might be difficult to address 3 major systems like HVAC. Yes. I'm guessing there will be some particular questions about how this will work for scattered site projects, but I can't say exactly what right now. Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, in the past, we've had an average, weighted average for each of the portfolios. So that is something we should dig into a little bit more too. We haven't spent too much time talking about how that might work, but yes, we'll dig in as well about how we would handle that. But I would assume similar to what we've done before, and try to average. And, you know, currently with a portfolio deal, each project has to meet the requirements, but scoring is weighted and can be different at each site. So yeah, I would think we would kind of do something similar in this new framework. Again, thanks everyone, especially to those of you who were able to make it for all three. And really appreciate everyone's time and input, and stay tuned for stuff coming through email in terms of if you need reference to any of the materials, and public comment. And again, I can't stress enough that we want to be available and want to chat with folks if there's particular questions or concerns or confusion about what we're trying to do in this next couple of years here. So appreciate everyone and everyone's time. Thank you all and have a great afternoon. Bye.